Around the globe, data is everywhere, growing exponentially.
Data powers entire businesses.
Fueling industries with insights, knowledge, and opportunities.
We've been on a mission to help organizations mobilize their data with the Snowflake Data Cloud.
Now you can break down silos of data, uniting teams across your business.
You can share data with suppliers and partners to drive decisions.
And tap third-party data instantly
to gain new insights and a competitive edge.
When you have the full story, you can serve your customers in entirely new ways.
The Data Cloud is redefining your industry,
helping realize your company's vision,
empowering you to build the future
by bringing data
together
now.
According to research, and depending on who you ask, of course, around up to 70% of software implementations are considered a failure, and up to 28% are considered a spectacular failure. Now, that costs hundreds of millions of pounds, euros, dollars, and in return, you don't get much of a result. Now, here today, we want to talk a little bit more about how you can make those implementations actually successful and the role that humans, us people, play in that. My name is Eva Murray. I'm a senior evangelist with Snowflake based here in London. And a fun fact about me is that aside from my job, I really like cooking. So much so that 12 years ago, I auditioned for MasterChef New Zealand, and I did manage to get into the top 24. Over to you, Kent.
Thanks, Eva. Hi, everyone. I'm Kent Graziano. I'm the Chief Technical Evangelist at Snowflake. I'm based in outside of Houston, Texas. Been with the company for almost 6 years now, since the very early days when we were a startup over in Silicon Valley. Been in data for a very long time, but something other people don't really know about me is I've actually been training in Taekwondo and other martial arts for over 40 years. I even spent a year living in Japan studying Judo and Aikido there. So I've actually been at that longer than I've been at data.
But Kent, you have been working in data for a while. If it's not 40 years, how long is it, would you say?
Well, it has been many decades for sure. And it's almost 40 years because I started programming when I was in high school. I started off as a scientific programmer and then ended up working with relational databases very, very early in my career and found those much more interesting. So I was building operational systems, but in the mid 90s, I got introduced to Bill Inman and the concepts of data warehousing and analytics, and I really just kind of gravitated towards there, and that's kind of been what I've done ever since. And that's what ultimately led me to Snowflake.
Excellent. And across your career, how many technology projects like implementations, migrations, etc., have you been involved in? I'd imagine it's probably quite a few. Can you put a number on it?
I mean, I've never really thought about it. I've definitely had a lot of roles and jobs in my career. I'm suspecting it's certainly in the hundreds. Might be more than that, probably several hundred. I've been a consultant in the past for the U.S. government. I've worked with telcos, healthcare organizations, done consulting with software companies as well as worked for software companies like Snowflake, financial services company. And I even ran the data warehouse team for 5 years for a big public school system in the U.S. And then with my role here at Snowflake, I've been involved over the last 6 years with many of our customers. I know I have talked to at least 200 in the last 6 years. So it's, I've touched an awful lot of data projects, that's for sure. So, I guess thing for you, Eva, I mean, you've been working probably with, probably thousands of data and business analysts over the last 5 years of your career, and introduced them to things like visualizations and guiding them on best practices for building out what they're doing. what's something that you've learned from those interactions and how people work with technology?
Yeah, I've started out as an analyst myself. So I've started in consulting, then moved into a business analyst role in financial services, then turned into a consultant again, and a trainer actually, using Tableau before moving to the vendor side. And what I've learned and what I've come to really appreciate about analysts and what I love them for is their curiosity. They're really, really interested in figuring out why something is happening and how it's working. And they're not satisfied with the first answer you give them. They're really inquisitive. And I think they should be. And what I also noticed is, especially over the last 5 years, that I've been very involved in the data visualization community, particularly around here in Europe, but also, in the US, is that there is this eagerness for people to learn. They want to pick up new tools. They want to build their skills because they see the market demands it. And they don't want to just meet that demand. They want to excel at what they're doing. So that's been really encouraging. And something that I've noticed as well that might be a little bit concerning is that there might be an over-exaggeration on focusing on tools rather than building a really strong foundation when it comes to data literacy and data analysis skills. So I think we need to strike a balance there. That's because it's really important for the job, for people to be successful, to not just know how to use a tool, but to also know how to work with the data and why you treat it in a certain way and things to avoid. I've found that people really like having an impact and using their skills for that. So I've seen a lot of skill-based volunteering, which has been really encouraging. And it is something where people can quite easily apply their skills to make a difference, and find that connection to like-minded individuals. And what I've also seen emerge, and it is very timely, of course, is that a lot of analysts are becoming very interested in data science and also design, which are very complementary skills for their work with data. So one takes it, I guess, to another level of complexity and advanced technical skills. And then when we look at design, it's really helpful in communicating the results to an audience that can be very broad, maybe even unknown. Okay, back to you, Kent. Now, based on your experience and the conversations that you've had with people that implement technology, and you've mentioned, 200 customers alone in your time at Snowflake, and then a lot of organizations prior to that, what would you say when we look at these technology implementations? What would you say are the biggest challenges and also the lessons learned that you took away from that time?
Well, the biggest challenge that I keep seeing is kind of on the opposite end of some of what you're saying is openness to change. That I've found that some technologists get very steeped in the specific technology they're working with, and so when something new comes along, they get a little nervous about whether or not their skills are going to transfer. And with change accelerating as much as it has, I mean, I certainly, even in the last 6 years that I've been at Snowflake, I've seen a massive acceleration in the change within our industry and the capabilities in our technologies. It can be daunting for some people to keep up and figure out how do I keep up, because it's changing in so many different dimensions. So not only do we have the technology changing, like with the cloud and products like Snowflake, but the terminology we use to talk about what we're doing changes. So we've had this going discussion, evolution, debate, whatever you want to think of it as, between data lakes and originally data warehouses, and then big data. And now we at Snowflake, we're talking about the data cloud. And that's a lot to take in for people as things are changing so much, going from on-prem to the cloud and going from batch processing to near real-time processing and streaming. And so folks really need time to adjust as well as time to experiment with the technology and get a good feel for it. So that really does require people, though, to be flexible, have an open mindset. And I talk about an agile mindset to adjust to this. But it also requires that they have the right organizational structure, and as you alluded to with data literacy and things like that, have the right culture in the company to allow them the freedom, adapt, and to experiment, and to grow and potentially fail. But that means that we really have to have organizations, if we're going to be data driven, that we're building a true data culture within the organization itself.
Yeah, and you touched on a really good point, because what I've seen, I've been in this career for about a little bit over 10 years. And just alone in that time, there's all these new technologies emerging. The cloud back then was the new buzzword, but a lot of people didn't really understand it. But then also, like you mentioned, with agile methodology, completely different way of working. So some people may have invested many years building their skills and their expertise on a very popular but now legacy technology, but also doing it in a certain way. And so the changes are multifold, right? It's not just the technology, but it's also how you run these projects, moving to an agile methodology. So I'd say there's definitely, the challenge of change, which brings us back to the idea of, well, people are really critical to make these implementations successful. Now, so when we look at these implementations, and if they're not fully successful, let's call it, they don't have to be spectacular failures, but a lot of them, I guess, leave us maybe wanting a bit more, or just don't get to exactly the results that we expected. Do you think there's a way to retrofit things so that you can still get to the outcome in a bit of a roundabout way? Have you got any recommendations there or ideas?
Well, sometimes, it's sad to see the statistics as to how many projects still continue to fail. But to me, in many cases, failure is in the eye of the beholder, and it's more about expectations and setting the right expectations for the project. So when someone says the project's a failure, we really have to dig in and say, well, in what aspect was it a failure? Is it just that it took longer than management wanted it to take? Did it cost more? Or are we truly not driving the business value that we're expecting? So we have to be having the right conversation. And I think a lot of times we're having the wrong conversation that, okay, maybe one query didn't run as fast as everybody wanted it to, but does that really mean the project is a failure? Well, if that's the number one reason you built the system and the CEO answer when he needs it, okay, well, then maybe it is a failure. But if you look around, and I've seen this with even some of our customers, where they're going, well, we just can't get the queries going fast enough. It's like, well, how fast do you think is fast enough? And they can't really tell me. Faster than what it's going today. And then I ask the question, well, how fast did it run in your system before the project? And the answer is like 3 or 4 days. Or in some cases, well, we could never actually get this to work prior to doing this. It's like, well, but then how is this a failure? Because you now have something you didn't have that's running faster than what it ever did before. So it's getting people to think about things in the right perspective, but also, again, number one, being agile. And one of the principles of agile is fail fast. And so if you deem something a failure, well, okay, great. But let's get on with it. Okay, what's the next step? We need to do a retrospective. Where did we fail? Can we figure out why did we fail? Right? Was it a lack of training? Was it a lack of understanding of the technology? Was it a lack of understanding of the business requirements? And those are all questions you need to ask in a retrospective on something if someone says it's a failure, because just because that particular piece of it failed doesn't mean the whole thing is a failure. And we have to learn to be able, again, this is the culture thing, to encourage the teams to try, to keep striving, to understand what we can do better, how we can do better, and really help people get over whatever that learning curve is. And in part, being aware that there is a learning curve. We mentioned Agile a couple of times now. When I first started doing Agile projects, everybody's expecting a 2-week sprint. Well, you can't take a team that's never done Agile and say, thou art Agile, and expect them to deliver something in 2 weeks. I've seen where it could take up to a year for the team to get their techniques in place, their working structure in place, their templates, things that help them be agile, because there wasn't any of that. The artifacts just aren't there. The mindset's not there. But then once they get there, then they start moving and achieving things in an agile fashion. So it may look like a failure today, but a little farther down the road, it actually becomes wildly successful instead. So again, back to setting the right expectations up front.
And if we look at now projects that haven't started yet, so the retrospective obviously helps us. Okay, we've gone through it already. We're now going to make sure we stay on track, or we move to the next successful outcome. If we are looking at projects that haven't kicked off yet, what would you recommend for them so that they get on the right track right from the beginning?
Well, really doing a thorough assessment, doing a pilot project or a proof of concept of some sort, and developing things like playbooks and examples. Somebody's got to do that learning, right? Making sure that, if you're working with a vendor, that you've done your due diligence on the vendor and you've clearly defined success, what the key success criteria are going to be, because that's part of the problem, like I said, is setting the right expectations, is what are we trying to accomplish so that the team knows what they're working towards as they start, because then they can measure how well they are moving towards that. And doing it in a small pilot or a POC is always a great way to go, because we're not trying to reinvent the entire enterprise right out of the gate. We know we've got new technology. We know we've got a new approach. Let's start with something small we can get our hands around. And then it's important to have a community. All of our tools and technologies and approaches all have communities. There's an Agile community, there's a cloud community, there's a Snowflake community, there's a Tableau community. So reaching out and building relationships in those, especially if this stuff is new to you, to really have a place to get feedback and to get help. I know in my career previously, I was in the Oracle world, in the Oracle user group world, and I got so much benefit from talking to other people in that area that I could send emails. If I ran into a problem, I could send an email to a DBA friend half a world away, and within an hour have an answer back that might have solved a problem that could have taken months for me to solve on my own. So very, very important for people to be able to do that, to really try to achieve that success, is be ready to go with all of that and be open to all of that.
Yeah, especially with, like you say, the communities being so readily available. They're just waiting to help, basically. Now, in addition to those tips, any suggestions to make sure that project management is set up the right way? Is there anything you want to add there?
Obviously, it helps if you've got people organizing the project that have done this sort of thing before. So that's kind of key, and it goes back to having that open, agile mindset. In my experience, most every company I've talked to is absolutely moving towards an agile methodology, but there are people with experience in agile, and there are people that really don't have experience in agile, and you need to have people leading the team who have done this type of project before, even if it's not with a specific technology. Because having one of the things I discovered is a Scrum Master who's worked with a data project versus a Scrum Master who has worked with, say, a C++ project. Very different mindset, very different approach in their experience with the skills that people need and building the team and all of that. And so it's really important to look at that and make sure that you indeed have the people with the right experience involved, and not just take some poor team, dub them the implementation team, and more or less throw them to the wolves and say good luck.
Yeah. And now you've done quite a bit of work with our partners over the years. What role do you suggest a partner company or partner team could play during an implementation to support the customer, to support the organization that's implementing something new?
Well, pretty much right along the lines of what I was just talking about, experience is getting a consulting partner or a system integrator that already has that experience, that has some best practices, has some miles under their belt, as it were, doing these type of projects, whatever it is you're trying to take on. So they can come in with the lessons learned, with the best practices, and be your expert guide to ensure that you're not making wrong turns, right? There's best practices, there's worst practices too. And having someone who's done that, or a team of people who have done that, to get you started at least and get you pointed in the right, make sure that you don't make the same mistakes that others have already made, and that you learn from the experiences. Again, it's kind of a community thing. So it's very helpful. And I know a lot of our customers at Snowflake have certainly gotten incredible value from our SI partners who have come in and helped them with their migrations to Snowflake and like implementations over the last couple of years. So, one of the key points, whole reason we're having this talk, right, Eva, is that, people and change management really are critical. I mean, we haven't talked much about technology at all here, right? So far, we're not really talking about technology. We're talking about people and culture, and that's really going to be success. The thing that's going to drive the success for these type of projects. So, what would you say is, important, really important at the people level from your experience?
The first word that comes to mind is communication. And in my experience, having worked in different organizations where, as a consultant, either you're the one implementing the technology or helping the customer implement the technology, but also when I worked in industry, being at the receiving end. And what my experience was that it's absolutely critical to take people on the journey, as we always call it. But there's so much truth to that, because they want to feel like they're part of the process and not just presented with some end result of, okay, this is the new software you're going to use in your daily life. And I think these days, and COVID really has shown us this, we're all doing things virtually. We're so much more able to participate in work stuff that doesn't happen in our office or right in front of our eyes. So I think there's a huge opportunity to actually show things throughout the process. And you've mentioned pilot projects, and I think they're a great way to actually share milestones and small successes with a wider audience and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Here is the outcome of our pilot project, and we just wanted to show you what this could mean for you in the future once we reach milestone X or the implementation has been completed. Because I think it is true that seeing is believing, and people need to see what's in it for them so that they can see, based on this benefit, I actually want to be part of this. And a good way to do that is to have champions internally that are part of the data culture that you mentioned and that influence others, but in a positive way. So it's not about convincing them of something that they don't want to be convinced of, but rather showing them, hey, I've been part of this. I've seen the great benefits we can achieve. I've seen how this can help us do our work faster, more easily, with less frustration, with more data. And really, it's this peer-to-peer communication that I think is really valuable. And that's where internal champions can play a huge role. And also understanding who is most affected by the change and how to include those people in the process. And also who wants to be involved. It's typically those internal champions, but there might be some people that you as the project manager haven't considered yet. So just looking a bit further beyond the ones that typically raise their hand and seeing who else could be part of the process. And something I really like doing and suggesting is to have some kind of step-by-step activities that can be part of this whole process where, at certain milestones, maybe things happen. Apart from a showcase, maybe there are ways for other people to be tinkering in a test environment to just see it for themselves. So that's something I would add there.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. It really is critical to be able to celebrate success and show that progress. And that's really, one of the benefits, I guess, of running a POC before you try to do a full-blown implementation is they can get a taste of not only the technology, but the benefits it's going to bring to the business. And I think that's one of the keys that I've seen is that celebrating the success, at the end of the sprint, that we delivered what we were supposed to deliver. Still do the retrospectives so that you know where things didn't go right, where things went right, and allows you to refocus as you do the next iteration. So we're in a state of continuing improvement, continuous improvement, and that's going to allow us then to keep moving forward and build on the success that we've had. One of the agile principles I love is about having a motivated team, right? And that's kind of what you were just referring to. Is it's really important that the team be bought in, that they are motivated, they see the value that they're now delivering, and they're excited about the work they're doing. And that's really the thing that's going to make a difference. Is that they're excited about it, and they're ready to take on new challenge, not afraid to fail. So I think we're getting kind of near the end of our time here, Eva. Is there any a couple of points that you would summarize for your tips for success?
So I think in terms of those tips we mentioned, the ones from me would be involve your people early on and build those internal champions, and keep them interested by communicating regularly on whatever it is, milestones, outcomes, things they can tinker with, they can test out. That would be my key points. What about yours? Anything to add from what you've said earlier?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, it's like you say, communication, celebrate the success. On the technology side, of course, get the training, and get the training done early, whether it's through the vendor's training organization, through expert consultants, whatever it is. Make sure the staff feels comfortable with the technology before you start asking them to deliver so much so fast. A lot of our customers have enlisted Snowflake resident solution architects to guide them through their journey, and that's proven to be a very successful model as well. So where can the folks watching us today get some more information, Eva?
Yeah, so we've set up a special site, and if you go to snowflake.com/big-data-LDN, you can find more information. You can connect with us, set up a meeting or a chat where you can get answers to any questions you might have and talk to people. And to finish up, I want to ask you, Ken, to maybe mention a couple of customers who really nailed their implementation, who are doing great work. Any that come to mind?
Yeah, well, since you're in London, the first customer I got to work with in the UK when we opened up there was Sainsbury's, and they have just done a spectacular job of going to the cloud and updating their data analytics for the modern age. They got in very early. I actually delivered myself the first Snowflake training class for them there in London, and we had, in the space of 2 weeks, probably several hundred people that they ran through, and different roles, different responsibilities. Sometimes we would have 25 people, and then the next class we would have 50, and they'd be completely different people, but they all got early training before they even got access to the software. And then they engaged our dedicated resident solution architects to continue to guide them. And so it's been a big, very, very successful project. And then Atheon Analytics, they created a whole new commercial product based on our data cloud, where they're sharing data with their customers and helping them optimize their inventory planning and forecasting. So that's been a great success. And then a couple of others, Sony PlayStation, OAG, and William Hill, they're all based there, are actually presenting their stories here at Big Data London. So everybody, please, take a look at the agenda. The site that Eva mentioned earlier has a list of their times. I think OAG may have been presenting right before us, so you can watch that on replay if you want, and hopefully you can watch some of them live and learn from it. And, build the community like we were just talking about, and build on the success of others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Ken. That was great chatting to you. And thank you for sharing all those tips. I'm sure people will have benefited a lot, and looking forward to seeing what comes out of it.
Yeah, and everyone else, be sure to hang on here, because we've got a live Q&A coming up right now. Thanks, everyone.
Can you hear me now? Yay. I was just saying, how professional are they? Like, you were like TV presenters, Eva. I loved it.
Thank you, Claire.
We've got a couple of questions for you. Here we go. First question. Will my team need any specific skills or training if they were going to get involved with this?
Well, the answer, as so often, is a little bit, it depends. So it depends a bit what you're using the technology for, how much you want to do with it. You can be fairly hands-off and really let us do a lot of the heavy lifting. But I would say, some of the basic foundational skills around SQL and the typical things you need to interact with the database and work with it are definitely beneficial. And there is a number of different avenues of gaining those skills, but it really depends on how far you want to take it. So I would naturally recommend, to get the most out of it, definitely train your people. And as Kent mentioned, training them early on is really, really helpful. It's like you want to excite them before they can get their hands on it, so that they're really ready to dive in and adopt the technology.
Yeah, which is all the way to get the people who want to do it. Otherwise, you're holding yourself back. Okay, thank you. So next question, what makes people choose Snowflake over anything else? What's so special?
Yeah, I'd say from a personal perspective, on the one hand, the capabilities, the breadth of what we offer, but also the ease of use, not having to do much of the heavy lifting, but rather letting us deal with it. You can set it up in less than a couple of minutes. That was certainly my experience when I first tested it out, and you can do so much with it. You can keep it as a data warehouse. You can also really dive into data science. You can handle all your analytics on top of Snowflake. You can get really deep into data sharing and access third-party data, so you can have richer analyses and really benefit from the stuff that's out there. And so many organizations I've worked with in the past many years, they want to access other data so that they can figure out, okay, how do we best serve our customers? Especially right now when we're looking at all this COVID data, and how do we get back as a business in this ever-changing economy and these uncertain times? What do we need to know to open up shops, to keep our staff safe in offices, etc.? So bringing that data in that we typically, as organizations, don't generate ourselves, but that we can access quite easily. And then building apps on top of Snowflake as well. There are a lot of different options for what to do with it, and I think so many organizations really see the opportunities that come for them by putting that technology at the center of what they do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So thank you very much to Eva, and obviously to Kent as well. Really appreciate you both sharing that conversation and hopping on them for the questions. So thank you so much.